You don't understand, Elena. I'm not suggesting. I'm communicating an operational necessity. Julianne didn't even look up from her tablet. The sound of her heels against the marble floor of the Willis Towers entrance hall echoed like a metronome, relentless and cold. Outside, the Chicago snow began to blur the view of the cars, turning the city into a gray blur. Elena quickened her pace, feeling the icy air escape every time the revolving doors moved, sending shivers down her neck. She held 2 cups of coffee, the warmth of the cardboard lightly burning the palms of her hands, the only point of comfort on that chaotic morning. Operational necessity? Elena let out a short, breathless laugh that came out like a small cloud of steam. Julianne, you want me to travel to Vermont, to your family's house, and lie to your mother, that woman who, by the way, has a natural lie detector in her gaze. You want me to pretend that there's a we. That's not in my job description. Julianne suddenly stopped. Elena nearly collided with her back, the scent of expensive perfume and strong coffee invading her senses in a way that always left her a little dizzy. The executive turned slowly. Her eyes were the color of Lake Michigan on a stormy day, a deep blue, almost leaden, surrounded by an exhaustion she tried to hide with layers of concealer and arrogance. She stepped closer, invading Elena's personal space, forcing the assistant to back up until her back met the cold support column of the building. What's in your job description is to ensure I can close the merger with the Miller Group. Julianne lowered her voice, her tone becoming hoarse, dangerous. And the patriarch of the Millers only does business with family women. My mother has already spread it to half the world that I'm engaged. If I show up there alone, or worse, contradict her in front of the investors, the contract dies. And if the contract dies, your year-end bonus and your promotion to management die with it. Do you understand the operation now? Elena felt her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't fear. It was that familiar irritation, mixed with a tension she had refused to name for 2 years. She looked at Julianne's mouth, her lips pressed into a thin line, marked by a perfect nude lipstick that looked like armor. For a second, the silence between them was filled only by the hum of the elevators and the distant sound of traffic. "It's a lie," Elena whispered, her voice wavering a little more than she intended. "It's all a rotten setup. You treat me like a walking calendar from Monday to Friday, Julianne. How do you expect anyone to believe that I would endure you for more than 10 minutes without a work contract involved?" Julianne didn't back down. On the contrary, she tilted her head, a strand of blonde hair escaping her impeccable bun and brushing against Elena's cheek. The touch was so light it could have been an accident, but the heat radiating from it was disproportionate. "So be a good actress, Elena, because I'm the only thing standing between you and that hospital debt of your sister's that you're trying to hide from me. But I know it consumes every cent of your salary. Signing up for a new life isn't free, and I'm offering the ticket." The blow was low. Elena felt the bitter taste of truth in her mouth. She squeezed the coffee cup so tightly that the lid of one gave way, a warm drop falling onto her thumb. She didn't look away. There, amid the flow of suited people who didn't even notice the silent drama leaning against the pillar, something changed. The relationship, which had previously been one of clear subordination, gained a splinter, an edge that would cut both of them. "You're detestable," Elena said, her voice now firm, cold as the wind blowing outside. "But you're right. I need the money. Just don't expect me to smile while you step on me." Julianne extended her hand, taking one of the coffees. Her fingers brushed against Elena's for too long to be just a transition of objects. She didn't say thank you. She just held the gaze, a spark of something that seemed like relief, or perhaps something darker, crossing her irises before returning to the mask of ice. "Great. The jet leaves at 6. And Elena..." Julianne turned her back, beginning to walk toward the private elevators without looking back. "Buy a ring. Nothing too flashy. Something that looks like I chose it thinking of you. I'll reimburse you later." Elena stood there, frozen, feeling the warmth of the coffee dripping down her hand and the cold of Chicago creeping up her legs. She looked at her empty hand, her fingers still tingling where Julianne had touched her. What was that? A transaction? A mistake? She knew that by agreeing to get on that plane, she was leaving behind the safety of the rules. There was no HR in Vermont. There were no clear boundaries when you had to pretend to love the person who irritated you the most in the world. Sometimes, love and hate wore the same perfume and the same authoritative tone of voice. She walked toward the exit, needing fresh air, even if it was air that would freeze her lungs. She needed to call her sister, needed to organize the lie, but above all, she needed to understand why, in the pit of her stomach, there was a vibration that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the dangerous expectation of seeing Julianne outside that office, of seeing her disarmed, if that woman even had a heart beneath the silk of her blouse. You're holding the cutlery like it's a weapon, Elena. Relax your shoulders. If my mother notices you're in a combat position every time I breathe, dinner won't make it past the appetizer. Julianne adjusted her seatbelt as the private jet sliced through the thick clouds over the Midwest. The cabin was a cocoon of beige leather and mahogany, but the air inside felt thin. Elena looked at her own hands. The knuckles were white from gripping the plastic fork of the snack she had barely touched. She dropped the object as if it were on fire. Chicago was already just a distant glimmer far below, and the reality of what she was doing began to weigh like lead in her lungs. Maybe it's because I'm in combat mode, Elena replied, her voice hoarse from fatigue. You gave me 3 hours to pack a bag, buy a fake engagement ring, and explain to my sister that I was going to disappear for 5 days on a secret mission. The ring, by the way, was the cheapest I could find that didn't look like it came out of a gumball machine. Julianne extended her hand. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was a silent command. Elena hesitated, her heart giving an uneven lurch, before placing her hand over Julianne's. The temperature difference was absurd. Julianne's skin was always cold, as if her blood circulated at a different, slower, more calculated voltage. She took Elena's hand and twisted the zirconia ring on her ring finger. The touch was technical, but the pressure of Julianne's fingers at the base of hers made Elena hold her breath for a second too long. It's acceptable, Julianne murmured, her eyes fixed on the jewel, but her thumbs tracing an almost imperceptible arc on Elena's palm. Discreet, like you, but you need to stop shaking. My family, they're not like the people at the office. They look for cracks, and you're full of them today. Everyone has cracks, Julianne. Even you. Elena pulled her hand back, missing the contact in the immediate second it ceased, which irritated her deeply. Except yours are covered by $2,000 suits. Why so afraid of this trip? You're the most powerful woman in that tower in Chicago. Why do you tremble at the thought of a mother seeing you're alone? Julianne looked away toward the window. Her profile, silhouetted against the darkness of the night outside, suddenly seemed more fragile. The jaw that was always so rigid relaxed by just a millimeter. Elena noticed a small scar near her ear, something she had never seen under the fluorescent lights at work. It was a human mark, a flaw in perfection. My mother doesn't see loneliness as a choice, Elena. She sees it as a character flaw, Julianne said, her voice so low it almost got lost in the noise of the engines. To her, if I have no one, it's because I'm too much to be loved, too difficult, too cold. And the Millers, they think the same way. They don't trust lone wolves. They trust packs. Stability. I need you to be my stability for 72 hours. That's it. And then, Elena leaned forward, the scent of lavender and iron emanating from Julianne becoming almost hypnotic. After the contract is signed and we go back to Union Station, I go back to being the assistant you forget to say good morning to, and you go back to being the woman who doesn't have time to feel anything. Julianne looked back at her. There was no arrogance like before. There was something denser, an electric current that seemed to connect their knees, brushing against each other under the narrow cabin table. Julianne didn't respond immediately. She kept watching Elena's mouth, the slight tremor in her lower lip, the way the assistant's breath was short and warm. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of the wind outside, 30,000 feet in the air. After, Julianne began, but her voice faltered. She cleared her throat, regaining her composure. After, you'll have your promotion, and I'll have my peace. It's a business deal, Elena. Don't try to find poetry where there's only strategy. You're terrible at this. Elena smiled, but it was a sad smile, laden with a perception that frightened her. You try so hard to be a machine that you forget I see you when the coffee runs out and you think no one is looking. I see when you press your temple because the migraine is killing you, but you refuse to admit weakness. You're not made of strategy, Julianne. You're made of fear of being seen. Julianne hardened her gaze, but she didn't pull away. On the contrary, she leaned in closer, her face inches from Elena's. The tension was almost physical, a force field pulling them both into an abyss of uncertainties. Elena could see the pores of her skin, the slight discoloration under her eyes, the humanity Julianne tried so hard to stifle. "Don't analyze me," Julianne hissed, but her eyes sparkled in a way that contradicted the hardness of her words. "You're not paid to understand me. You're paid to accompany me. Stick to the script." "The script says I'm your fiancé," Elena whispered, the audacity burning in her chest like a shot of cheap whiskey. "And fiancés don't usually take orders like that. They provoke. They know the weak points." Julianne opened her mouth to retort, but the pilot announced the start of the descent. The jolt of the aircraft made Julianne lose her balance for a millisecond, her hand firmly landing on Elena's thigh to stabilize herself. The heat of the touch pierced through the fabric of her jeans, sending an electric shock straight to Elena's spine. Neither of them moved. Julianne kept her hand there, her fingers digging slightly into Elena's flesh, her eyes locked onto hers. It was a challenge, a question without words. "Vermont is cold this time of year," Julianne said, her voice suddenly soft, almost a whisper. "I hope you brought heavy coats, because there, the ice doesn't forgive those who try to pretend warmth." She withdrew her hand slowly, inch by inch, leaving a trail of awareness ignited on Elena's skin. Julianne leaned back into the armchair, closing her eyes as if the conversation had never happened, but the crease between her eyebrows remained. Elena looked out the window, seeing the scattered lights of the snow-covered mountains emerging in the darkness. She felt like she was entering a territory where the rules of Chicago didn't apply. And worst of all, she realized that for the first time in 2 years, Julianne was not in control of everything. There was a crack, and Elena, unwittingly, was starting to like what she saw through it. She glanced at the cheap ring on her finger and felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with the landing. The theater was about to begin, but the lines already felt too real to be just a performance. Julianne's command came in a whisper, warm against Elena's ear, contrasting with the icy air of Vermont that seemed to cut through her skin. The black SUV had just parked in front of a property that looked like it had stepped out of a luxury postcard. A structure of dark wood and stone, nestled among snow-laden pines, with yellowish lights glowing in the wide windows. The smell of burning wood and pine resin was everywhere. Julianne intertwined her fingers with Elena's. It was not an office touch. It was firm, possessive, their palms meeting and creating a microclimate of warmth between them. Elena felt Julianne's pulse against hers. It was quick. The Iron Woman of Chicago was nervous. That realization made something crumble inside Elena, a sudden desire not just to play the role but to protect her. "Your hands are cold, Julianne," Elena murmured, quickening her pace as they walked along the wooden porch that creaked under their boots. "Relax. I should be the one in a panic here. I'm the intruder. You're not the intruder. You're my safe harbor, remember?" Julianne stopped in front of the massive oak door. She looked at Elena, and for a second, the executive mask completely fell away. There was a silent plea in those blue eyes. "If they find out, if they see it's a lie, I don't know if I can handle what comes next." Before Elena could respond, the door opened. An older woman, possessing the same aristocratic bearing as Julianne, but with a much sharper gaze, appeared in the doorway. It was Martha. She didn't say anything right away. She simply swept her gaze over the two of them, moving down to their joined hands and back up to Elena's face. The silence lasted an eternity of 3 seconds. So, Martha finally spoke, her voice dry as winter. "You're the woman who accomplished the impossible." Julianne finally stopped dating her own balance sheet to bring someone home. "Come in, before the ice turns you into statues." The house was suffocating in its perfection. Persian rugs, crackling fireplaces, and the sound of crystal clinking in the distance. Julianne didn't let go of Elena's hand for even a second. In fact, she seemed to use Elena as an anchor. During dinner, the performance became a dangerous dance. Elena felt Julianne's gaze on her the entire time. Not the look of a boss checking a report, but something hungry, attentive to every movement of her lips. Every time she laughed at one of her father's jokes, or told a half-invented story about how they met. "She's persistent, you know," Elena said, addressing Martha, while feeling Julianne's knee press against hers beneath the table. The pressure was constant, deliberate. Julianne doesn't take no for an answer. At first, I thought it was just her way of managing the world, but then I realized it was just her way of saying she cared. Julianne slightly choked on her wine. She looked at Elena, her cheek taking on a rosy hue that didn't come from the heating system. Julianne's hand, which had been on the table, slid onto her lap, and Elena felt her fingers touch the tips of hers beneath the tablecloth, a furtive electric touch that made the words die in Elena's throat. Julianne cleared her throat, her voice a bit deeper. Elena has this knack for reading people better than they read themselves. Sometimes it's annoying. Other times it's the only thing that keeps me sane. The rest of the night was a blur of subtext. Every compliment Julianne gave Elena sounded like a confession she would never have the courage to make on the 40th floor of the tower in Chicago. The desire was there, not in the words, but in the silences that lingered between phrases, in the way Julianne wiped an imaginary smudge from the corner of Elena's mouth with her thumb, a gesture that lasted 2 seconds longer than necessary. Martha observed everything with an arched eyebrow, a hunter waiting for her prey to falter. When they were finally released to the guest room, the tension they had been building exploded in the silence of the hallway. Julianne closed the door to the guest room, a rustic space with a huge 4-poster bed and the scent of lavender, and leaned her back against the wood, exhaling the air she seemed to have been holding since the airport. That was... Julianne began, but didn't finish. A disaster? Elena suggested, setting her bag aside. The room was dim, illuminated only by the moonlight reflecting off the snow outside. Your mother knows, Julianne, or she suspects a lot. She looks at us as if she's trying to find the loose thread in this fabric. She doesn't know anything. Julianne stepped forward. The room was too small for the energy radiating from them. She's just trying to destabilize me. It's her favorite sport. And is she succeeding? Elena asked, her voice low. She didn't back away when Julianne approached. On the contrary, she took a step toward her boss. Julianne stopped so close that Elena could feel the heat radiating from her body. The moonlight outlined Julianne's face, highlighting the vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide. Julianne's hand rose, hesitantly, and stopped mere millimeters from Elena's face. Her fingers trembled. It wasn't the cold. It was the absolute awareness of the other person there, in that private space, with no contracts, no emails, no excuses. You said those things down there, Julianne murmured, her voice almost a whisper. About me caring. About the no, I won't accept. Was that part of the script? Elena felt her throat dry. The scent of Julianne, that Chicago perfume now mixed with the cold of the mountains, was intoxicating. She could see the pulse at the base of Julianne's neck. Quick, desperate. I'm a good assistant, Julianne, Elena replied, her voice faltering. I know when the script ends and the truth begins. You just haven't realized that I've stopped acting for a long time. The silence that followed was thick, almost palpable. Julianne didn't look away. She seemed to be fighting against centuries of self-control, against every rule she had written for her life. Her hand finally touched Elena's cheek, a touch so light it felt like a question. Her thumb traced the line of Elena's jaw, and the contact made Elena close her eyes for a moment, surrendering to that forbidden feeling. Signing up for a lie comes at a price, and Elena was beginning to realize that the cost was much higher than her year-end bonus. She felt Julianne's breath against her lips, a silent invitation, a boundary that, if crossed, would change everything forever. The world outside was frozen, but there, in that room, the ice was beginning to crack under the weight of something neither of them had the courage to name. Elena. The name slipped from Julianne's lips like a broken sigh. Julianne didn't pull away, but she also didn't move closer. She stood there, suspended in the abyss between who she was and who she wanted to be when no one was looking. She thought she had control of the situation, but for the first time, control was the last thing she wanted to have. You can't do this. Not here. Not now. Julianne's words came out crushed, a mix of panic and a desire she was desperately trying to bury. She stepped back, her heels hitting the base of the canopied bed. The impact made the linen curtains sway gently. Elena didn't move. She remained there, in the center of the room, the moonlight outlining her shoulders, revealing the posture of someone who had nothing left to lose. The air between them was charged, dense as the snow piling up outside, muffling any sound coming from the rest of the house. What to do, Julianne? Elena asked, her voice dangerously calm. Be honest? stop pretending I don't feel your gaze on my back every day in that conference room? Do you think I'm blind? Or worse? Do you think I'm just a piece on your board that you can move to Vermont when your pride is at stake? Julianne looked away, her hands fumbling on the patchwork bedspread, her fingers clutching the thick fabric. The silence stretched. You could hear the creaking of the old house adjusting to the extreme cold. Each creak sounded like a shot to Julianne's chest. She was used to giving orders, drafting termination clauses, silencing opposition with a gesture. But Elena was a variable she couldn't isolate. "This is a mistake," Julianne murmured, more to herself than to the other. "It's a strategic error. We have an agreement. If we, the structure collapses. I can't lose control now, Elena. My mother is in the room next door. The Millers are arriving early tomorrow. Everything depends on us being professional." "Professional?" Elena let out a bitter laugh, taking a step forward, closing the distance Julianne was trying to preserve. "You looked at me all through dinner, Julianne. You held my hand like your life depended on it. Signing up for a lie is easy. The problem is when we start to believe our own performance. You're scared because for the first time, there's no exit clause for what you're feeling." Julianne abruptly lifted her face. The wounded pride shone in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by raw vulnerability. She stood up, just inches away from Elena. The heat radiating from both of them was the only thing preventing the room from freezing. Julianne could see the reflection of her own confusion in Elena's dilated pupils. She reached out, not to push away, but to hold Elena's arm, her fingers tightening around the soft fabric of her sweater. "You don't know what you're saying," Julianne hissed, though her breath was uneven, betraying every word of denial. "You don't know the weight I carry. If I leave a crack open, if I let you in, everything I've built will be real," Elena interrupted, her voice now soft, almost a caress. "And that's what terrifies you, isn't it? The fact that you can be happy without needing a signed contract, in triplicate." Julianne's hand moved from Elena's arm to the nape of her neck, her fingers tangling in the short strands of hair there. The touch was possessive, almost desperate. She pulled Elena closer until their foreheads touched. The scent of Julianne, now just skin and a hint of red wine, was all Elena could process. The world of Chicago, the spreadsheets, the bonuses, the hospital bills, everything seemed like a distant illusion. The only truth was the rapid heartbeat she felt under her palm, where she touched Julianne's chest. "I hate you for doing this," Julianne whispered against Elena's lips. "I hate that you know me so well." "That's a lie," Elena replied, closing her eyes and surrendering to the contact. The kiss didn't happen. Not in that moment. Julianne paused just millimeters away, her lower lip trembling. It was the breaking point, but not in the explosive way one might imagine. It was a slow wearing down that finally gave way. Julianne released Elena and stepped back, walking to the window and hugging her own body, as if trying to hold herself together. She looked out at the darkness of Vermont, at the pines that survived winter, simply by being flexible enough not to break under the weight of the snow. "The Millers are arriving tomorrow," Julianne said, her voice now cold, professional, the mask being rebuilt piece by piece before Elena's eyes. "We will act like the perfect couple. We'll sign that contract. And then we will forget this conversation ever happened." "Can you do that?" Elena asked, feeling a cold emptiness settling where warmth had once been. "Can you look at me on Monday and ask for a report as if you hadn't almost begged me to stay here just now?" Julianne didn't answer. She remained turned away, a rigid silhouette against the fogged glass. Her silence was the most painful answer Elena had ever received. It was the sound of a door closing. Loving someone without the guarantee of permanence was like walking on a frozen lake in the middle of the night. You never know when the ice will give way, or if what you see is solid ground, or just an illusion of safety. Elena lay down on the opposite side of the bed, keeping a safe distance, an abyss of sheets between them. She heard when Julianne finally lay down, the sound of her breathing trying to find a rhythm that wasn't one of escape. Neither of them slept. The breaking point had been reached, but instead of liberation, it only brought the awareness of what would be lost when the sun rose. The plan was going perfectly. The contract would be signed. The company would be saved. But in the dark of that room in Vermont, Elena realized that the price of Julianne's victory would be her complete and utter silence. And sometimes silence is the loudest scream of all. "Where is she, Elena? The contract is on the table, and the patriarch of the Millers doesn't like to wait. He has this internal clock of impatience." Julianne was in the hallway, her voice low but heavy with an urgency bordering on desperation. She was wearing a gray wool suit that looked like armor, but her hands, hidden behind her back, were gripping the cuffs of her shirt so tightly that the knuckles were white. Breakfast had been an exercise in psychological torture. Martha, the mother, observed every interaction between the two with the precision of a hawk. And now, at the crucial moment of the merger, Julianne's bride seemed to be losing her balance. "She's in the kitchen, Julianne. Martha called her to help with the jams," Elena said, although the word help sounded like a euphemism for a third-degree interrogation. "You should go there. Or better yet, you should stop treating this like a Wall Street transaction for 5 minutes. You're sweating." Julianne brought her hand to her forehead, an automatic gesture of denial. The warmth of the house, caused by the fireplaces and the excess of people, was suffocating her. But what really suffocated her was the distance Elena was imposing now. After the sleepless night, Elena was acting with a cold politeness. There were no more sparks of challenge, just the efficiency of a high-level employee. And this, ironically, was destroying Julianne inside. "I can't lose this deal, Elena. It's my life. Everything I've done in the last 10 years has been to reach this day." Julianne took a step forward, trying to catch Elena's gaze, but the assistant was too busy aligning the papers in the leather folder. "Why are you looking at me like I'm a stranger?" "Because that's what you want, isn't it?" Elena finally lifted her eyes. They were dry, exhausted. "You said we would forget. I'm just speeding up the process. The contract will be signed, you will be the CEO of the new holding company, and I will receive my bonus. Everyone wins. That's what machines do, Julianne. They process and move on." Julianne felt a tightening in her chest that no financial crisis had ever caused. She opened her mouth to say something, to apologize, to say that the previous night had changed the axis of her course. But Martha appeared at the end of the hallway. The moment evaporated. Julianne's mother wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and behind her, the Millers entered the living room, exuding the scent of expensive tobacco and self-confidence. The next 3 hours were a blur of legal terms, handshakes, and rehearsed laughter. Elena played her role perfectly. She touched Julianne's shoulder at the right moments, tilted her head to listen to her stories, and even accepted a kiss on the cheek in front of the investors. But each touch was empty. It was like touching a hologram. Julianne felt the coldness at the tips of Elena's fingers, an invisible barrier that said, "You can have my body in this performance, but you will no longer have my shared silence." When the last pen was laid down and the billion-dollar deal was sealed, a toast was proposed. Champagne bubbled in crystal glasses. Julianne should have been radiant. She was officially one of the most powerful women in the country. But while everyone celebrated, she saw Elena stepping away to the side porch. The snow was falling heavily now, covering the mountain trails. Julianne followed her, leaving the guests behind. The cold Vermont air hit her like a slap, but it was a relief. Elena was leaning against the railing, watching the pines. She wasn't wearing a coat. Her shoulders shivered slightly, but she didn't seem to care about the cold. "It's over," Julianne said, her voice carried away by the wind. "We did it. The bonus will be in your account on Monday. And the promotion. You deserve more than management, Elena. I'm going to make you the director of operations." Elena gave a short smile, not looking back, a smile that cleaved Julianne's heart. "Thank you, Julianne, but I don't want the directorship. In fact, I don't want the assistant position anymore either." Julianne's world stopped. The sound of ice breaking on the branches felt like an explosion. "What are you talking about? We just won. You can't leave now." "I've already left, Julianne." Elena turned, and her face was marked by deep, calm sadness. "I left the moment I realized you prefer power over truth. You used me to buy your freedom from your family, but you remain a prisoner of your own fear. I can't work for someone I can't respect in the same way anymore. Is it because of what I said in the room?" Julianne took a desperate step, the snow crunching beneath her thin shoes. "I was scared. I've never felt this way about anyone, Elena. I didn't know how to name the fact that I feel like I'm going to die if you stop looking at me that way. So you chose to kill me first, Elena said, her voice firm. You chose the contract. And I understand. It's who you are. But I need someone who chooses me, even when the whole world is offering an empire in exchange for my silence. Julianne tried to hold her hand, but Elena pulled away. The cheap cubic zirconia ring sparkled in the pale winter light before Elena took it off her finger and placed it in Julianne's palm. The metal was cold. Keep it. To remember that, for one weekend you almost were human. Elena walked toward the SUV, waiting to take her to the municipal airport. She had arranged everything in secret. Julianne stood there, alone on the porch, as the car drove away down the winding road. She had the signed contract in the inner pocket of her blazer and a glass ring in her hand. She had everything she had ever wanted, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she had absolutely nothing. The solitude in Vermont was different from that in Chicago. It was quieter, more eternal. She looked at the ring and felt a tear freeze on her cheek. She thought she had escaped her mother's judgment and the company's bankruptcy. She was wrong. The true judgment was just beginning, and the sentence was the silence that Elena left behind. A silence that no billion-dollar merger could fill. Where is the transition memo, Julianne? The investors are online too, and the board wants to know why the operations director's chair is still empty. Martha's voice, coming from the speakerphone, sounded like static in the quiet Chicago office. Julianne didn't respond. She was standing in front of the immense glass wall of her office on the 40th floor, watching the orange sunset reflecting on Lake Michigan. It had been 2 weeks. 2 weeks since Vermont. 2 weeks since Elena's silence became the official soundtrack of her days. The office smelled of cold coffee and the new leather of the expensive furniture. But to Julianne, everything there felt sterile, like a luxury hospital. Julianne, are you listening to me? Her mother's voice insisted. The merger is complete. You won. Why are you acting like you've lost an arm? Maybe because I've lost something much harder to replace, Mom, Julianne murmured, finally hanging up the phone with a sharp click. She walked to the desk and opened the top drawer. There, inside a small velvet box that once held diamond cufflinks, was the cheap cubic zirconia ring. The fake jewels sparkled under the artificial light, a constant reminder that the greatest wealth she ever held in those hands cost less than $50 at an airport store. Julianne felt the tightness in her chest turn into physical pain, a stab every time she saw the empty chair in the anteroom where Elena used to organize Julianne's life, with an efficiency that she now realized was, in fact, care. She picked up her cell phone, opened the conversation with Elena for the 100th time. No message sent, no reply. She knew where Elena lived, a small apartment in Wicker Park that she helped pay for with the bonus Julianne had deposited. But pride, that shell hardened by years of corporate life, still prevented her from knocking on that door without a business purpose. Until that night, when the snow began to fall in Chicago again, heavy flakes that reminded her of Vermont. Julianne grabbed her coat, ignoring the email notifications flashing frantically on the monitor. She went down to the garage, her heart pounding against her ribs in a way that no contract closing ever had. Driving through Chicago in the middle of a storm was chaos, but she needed to get there. She needed to know if the crack that Elena had opened was still there, or if the ice had already closed everything up again. When she stopped in front of the brick building in Wicker Park, she saw the light on in the second-floor window. Julianne hesitated. Her fingers drummed on the steering wheel. She looked at the ring on the passenger seat. She wasn't good with words that weren't technical. She didn't know how to apologize without seeming like she was negotiating a truce. But upon seeing Elena's silhouette pass by the window up there, Julianne realized that she preferred to be humiliated by the truth than to be crowned by a lie. She climbed the stairs. The smell of an old building corridor, pine soap and home-cooked food, was the opposite of the sterilized marble of her tower. She knocked on the door. Once. Twice. The door opened. Elena was wearing a loose sweatshirt and had her hair tied up in a messy bun. Her eyes, when they met Julianne's, showed no shock. They showed a tired acceptance. "What are you doing here, Julianne?" Elena asked, her voice low. "If it's about the merger files, I left everything in the cloud. You have full access." "It's not about the files," Julianne said, her breath coming in shaky gasps. She felt the heat of the hallway and the cold she brought in her clothes merging, creating a tremor she couldn't control. I can't read the files, Elena. I can't read anything. I sit in that room and the only thing I see is the space where you should be laughing at my arrogance." Elena held the edge of the door, her fingers gripping the wood. She didn't invite her in. "You got what you wanted, Julianne. The empire is yours. Why aren't you celebrating with your mother and the Millers?" "Because the empire is too cold." Julianne stepped forward, invading Elena's space just as she had done at that pillar on the first day. But this time, there was no authority in her posture. There was total surrender. "I tried to be the person they wanted. I tried to be the CEO who feels nothing. But the truth is, ever since you got out of that SUV in Vermont, I haven't had a peaceful night. I miss everything. Your way of challenging me, the way you know I have a migraine before I even know. I miss being the Julianne who only exists when you're around." Elena looked away, her lower lip trembling. The silence between them in the hallway was heavy with 2 years of unspoken words and a week of accumulated longing. "You used me, Julianne," Elena whispered, the first tear escaping and tracing a warm path down her cheek. "You put me on display for your family and then tried to put me back in the assistant drawer. I'm not a year-end bonus." "I know." Julianne reached out, her touch hesitating before finding Elena's face. This time, Elena didn't pull back. "And that's why I don't want you to come back as an assistant. I don't want you to come back as a director. I want you to give me the chance to be someone worthy of being by your side. No contracts. No lies to my mother." Julianne took the zirconia ring from her coat pocket and held it between them. "I know this is cheap. I know it was part of a charade, but it's the only real thing I have right now. It's the symbol of the moment I almost became human. I didn't come here to offer you a position, Elena. I came here to ask if we can start over, where the script really ends." Elena looked at the ring, then back at Julianne. She saw the slightly smudged makeup, the hair tousled by the wind, and the genuine fear in those blue eyes that used to command thousands of people. The silence dragged on, tense, until Elena let out a long sigh and pulled Julianne into the apartment, closing the door to the outside world. The kiss that followed was not choreographed. It was urgent, salty from the tears, and loaded with a need that transcended any business plan.
Julianne held Elena close, feeling the warmth of her body, the texture of the sweatshirt, the reality of having someone who didn't love her for what she had, but for what she hid. "Signing up for this life with me is going to be difficult," Elena murmured against Julianne's lips, her hands tangled in the executive's neck. "I'm not going to make it easy for you. I'm going to keep challenging you. I'm going to keep annoying you."
"I hope so." Julianne smiled, a real smile that lit up her face in a way that Elena had never seen in Chicago. "Because that's the only part of us that I won't accept as a lie." Their lives were not resolved. There was the scandal of Elena's resignation, Martha's judgment, and the pressure of the merger. But as Julianne embraced Elena in the middle of that messy Wicker Park room, the ice from Vermont finally finished melting. They were no longer boss and assistant. They were just two women trying to figure out how to sustain a love that was born from a mistake, but had become the only right thing in their worlds. "You know my mom is going to have a meltdown when she reads this statement, right?" She was already organizing the buffet for the wedding in June. Julianne was sitting on the linen sofa in Elena's apartment, her legs crossed and a tablet on her lap, but her eyes weren't on the stock charts. They followed Elena's movements in the small kitchen, lit by the Sunday morning sun. The smell of pancakes and fresh coffee filled the air, an aroma that, for Julianne, now meant home, much more than any luxury condo on the magnificent mile. Elena turned around, holding a spatula, a mischievous smile playing at the corner of her lips that were still slightly swollen from the good morning kiss. "Let her have the meltdown, Julianne. It's part of her detox process." Elena walked into the living room, wiping her hands on her apron. "And technically, we didn't lie about everything. The engagement was fake, but the desire to run away with you to Vermont, well, that ended up becoming very real." Julianne set the tablet aside as if it were an obsolete object. She stood up and walked over to Elena. The space between them, once filled with protocols and a rigid hierarchy, was now occupied by a gentle gravity, a magnet pulling them toward the same center. Julianne touched Elena's waist, feeling the warmth through the thin cotton fabric. There was no rush. There was no contract to sign in 10 minutes. There was only the awareness that time now belonged to them. "I resigned from the board presidency. Julianne said the phrase with a lightness that surprised her. She expected to feel an emptiness, a loss of identity, but what she felt was as if she had taken off a lead suit after years. I will keep my shares, but I'll let Miller and my mother fight it out in the Monday meetings. I'm tired of being their shield. Elena stopped, eyes wide, breath hitching for a second. She knew the Julianne who lived for the numbers. She knew how much that tower meant to the woman in front of her. You did what? Elena whispered, her hands moving to Julianne's shoulders, fingers tracing the line of her collarbone with a new reverence. Julianne, that was your empire. It was a cage, Elena. A glass cage with an amazing view, but still a cage. Julianne tilted her head, pressing her nose against Elena's, their breaths mingling in a calm rhythm. I realized it doesn't matter to have the whole world at my feet if, at the end of the day, I have no one to share a cold pizza on the couch with without checking the clock. I want the life you showed me, the one that doesn't need a script. Elena smiled, and this time there was no shadow of sadness or irony. There was a full acceptance. She pulled Julianne into a tight embrace, hiding her face in the other woman's neck. Julianne's scent was now not just lavender and iron. It had something new, something warmer, more human. Julianne closed her eyes, feeling Elena's heart beating against hers, a steady rhythm anchoring her in reality. And now? Elena asked against her skin. What does a former CEO do with her life in Chicago? I was thinking of starting my own consulting firm, something small, where I can choose the people I work with. Julianne pulled back just enough to look into Elena's eyes, her hand rising to caress her cheek, with a tenderness that still felt new to both of them. And I was thinking I need the best operations director I've ever known. But this time, the terms of the contract are different. No hush money, no fake trips. Just the truth. All the time. Elena let out a short laugh, a vibration that Julianne felt in her own chest. You really can't stop managing everything, can you? You're already making job offers at breakfast. It's a life proposal, Elena, Julianne corrected, her voice becoming serious, deep. I spent years being what others expected. With you, I discovered that being who I really am is much more profitable for the soul. Elena pulled her down, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of new beginnings. It was a firm contact, yet filled with a patience they had never had before. In the silent apartment, far from the noise of the elevators in the Willis Tower and the cold expectations from Vermont, something was finally in order. The pieces of the puzzle that Julianne had tried to force for years now fit together on their own, without pressure, just with the fluidity of affection. They sat at the table, sharing pancakes as the Chicago sun rose in the sky, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. Julianne looked at her hand. The cheap zirconia ring was still there, but now she wore it on the middle finger of her left hand, a talisman. You know what's the funniest thing? Elena said while pouring more coffee. My sister called me yesterday. She said she's never seen me so happy, and that boss of yours looked really nice in the picture I sent. Julianne laughed, a genuine laugh that rarely echoed in her days as an executive. She didn't see anything. Wait until she sees me trying to cook next holiday. That will be a headline-worthy disaster. We'll have time for that. Elena reached out across the table, and Julianne immediately took her hand. Their fingers intertwined with a naturalness that made the past feel like a distant memory. All the time in the world. Life wouldn't be perfect. There would be arguments about who would do the dishes, challenges in the new business, and the inevitable family dinners that would be, at the very least, uncomfortable. But as they walked toward the balcony to watch the city, Julianne no longer felt the need to have all the answers. She didn't need a contingency plan for love. She looked at Elena, who was watching the cars below with an expression of absolute peace. The Chicago wind blew, but they did not feel cold. Julianne realized that the biggest merger of her life hadn't been between two companies, but between the woman she had been trained to be and the woman Elena had taught her to love. Julianne rested her chin on Elena's shoulder and closed her eyes, breathing in the cold morning air. She no longer needed to pretend that Elena was her wife to the world. Now, it was the world that would have to get used to the truth that they were simply each other's safe harbor. The cheap ring shone one last time under the bright sun, not as an accessory of a farce, but as proof that sometimes the best things in life begin with a phenomenal mistake. And Julianne, for the first time, was in no hurry to get anywhere. She was already exactly where she needed to be. The silence they shared now was no longer one of absence. It was a silence of fullness, of those who know that the most important chapter of the story is just beginning, and that this time, they are the only authors. Elena squeezed Julianne's hand, a small gesture that said everything words could not yet reach. And there, between the sky of Chicago and the warmth of an ordinary Sunday, Julianne finally left the door open. Forever. Are you telling me that the great Julianne Vance, the woman who folded administrative advice over breakfast, can't put together a bookshelf without reading the manual 3 times? Elena was sitting on the wooden floor of their new apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes and bubble wrap. The afternoon sun in Chicago streamed through the wide windows, illuminating the dust dancing in the air, and Julianne's face, which was visibly frustrated, with a screwdriver in hand, and a strand of hair falling over her eyes. The gray suit had been replaced by a soft cotton t-shirt and sweatpants, an image that 6 months ago would have been considered impossible. The manual is poorly translated, Elena. It's a structural logic flaw. They expect piece B to fit into slot C without considering the tension of the wood, Julianne grumbled, but there was a lightness in her voice that hadn't existed before. She tossed the tool aside and sat on the floor facing Elena. Besides, I'm distracted. It's hard to focus on screws when you're wearing that shirt. Elena looked down at her own blouse, a linen shirt of Julianne's that was oversized on her, the top buttons undone due to the heat of the moving effort. She smiled, feeling that familiar warmth rise up her neck. The tension between them hadn't disappeared with their closeness. It had merely changed form. It was no longer the static electricity of a cold office, but a constant magnetism, a gravity that kept them always in orbit around one another. Distracted, huh? Elena moved closer, crawling across the rug until her knees touched Julianne's. I thought you were the master of focus, the woman who never lets anything slip by. I let you slip away once, Julianne said, her voice suddenly low, losing its playful tone. She reached out and brushed the hair from Elena's face, her fingers tracing the outline of her ear with deliberate slowness. It was the biggest miscalculation of my life. I don't intend to repeat it. The silence that followed was filled with the distant sound of horns on the street and the rhythmic beating of Julianne's heart, which Elena could almost feel from the proximity. The smell of new wood, cardboard, and Elena's citrus perfume created an atmosphere of raw intimacy. Julianne slid her hand to the back of Elena's neck, gently pulling her closer. The touch was a question, an invitation that Elena answered with the inclination of her body, surrendering to the contact. My mom called again, Elena murmured, her lips just millimeters from Julianne's. She wants to know if we're going to her birthday next month, she said. Julianne is always welcome, as long as she doesn't try to audit the kitchen. Julianne let out a short laugh against Elena's mouth. Tell her I'm coming, but warn her that this time there will be no contracts, and that I plan to hold your hand the whole time, not because the script calls for it, but because I simply don't know how not to do it anymore. The kiss was slow, deep, filled with a peace that no billion-dollar merger could buy. Julianne felt the texture of Elena's lips, the warmth of her skin, the reality of a life that didn't need to be performed for anyone. There were no cameras, no investors, no shadow of Martha. There was only the truth of 2 people who chose the harder path to reach the simplest place, each other's embrace. When they pulled away, Elena rested her forehead against Julianne's. She noticed that Julianne was still wearing the cheap cubic zirconia ring on a thin gold chain under her t-shirt, the $50 metal touching the skin of a woman who could buy an entire jewelry store. You still keep that, Elena whispered, touching the pendant over the fabric. It's so I don't forget who I was before you, Julianne replied, holding Elena's hand and kissing the tips of her fingers. And to remind me that the most valuable things I have cannot be put on a balance sheet. They sat there, among the moving boxes, watching the sun set over Chicago. The city continued outside, noisy, ambitious, and cold. But inside that apartment, time seemed to have a different cadence. Julianne looked at the unfinished bookshelf, and then at Elena, who was already starting to open another box, laughing at something she found. She realized that success was no longer the top of the tower. Success was the sound of Elena's laughter echoing through the empty walls. It was the certainty that the next morning she wouldn't need a mask to face the world. She had Elena, and Elena had the real Julianne, the one who fumbled screws, who felt fear, and who loved with an intensity that almost scared her. Hey, Julianne, Elena called, pulling a picture frame from the box. It was the photo they took in Vermont, on the snow-covered porch, just before everything fell apart. In the picture, they were pretending. But looking closely, Julianne saw what she hadn't noticed at the time. The way she looked at Elena was already that of someone who had found her north. "Where do we put this?" Julianne got up and took the frame. She walked to the fireplace and placed it right in the center of the marble shelf. "There," Julianne said, wrapping her arms around Elena from behind and resting her chin on her shoulder, so that it's the first thing we see when we walk in. To remember that, of all my favorite mistakes, this was the only one that saved me. Life went on. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new meetings, and probably new arguments with instruction manuals. But there, in that shared silence, Julianne finally understood that she didn't need a perfect ending. She just needed a possible continuation. And as she felt Elena's warmth against her chest, she knew that this story, although it had stopped being told here, was just beginning its best part. Julianne tightened the embrace, smelling Elena's scent, the scent of a future they had written themselves. The sun disappeared on the horizon, but the light in the apartment remained on. A light that did not come from the designer lamps, but from something much more permanent. She smiled at the picture in the frame, then at the woman in her arms, and for the first time in her life, Julianne Vance had absolutely nothing to add. The silence was, after all, enough.